Her history with the bottle is not new. It is a pattern of collapse and survival stitched together by heartbreak and rage. The betrayal that first drove her to drink was not just an ordinary breakup but a cruel twist of fate that shattered her trust in the two people closest to her, Bill, her husband, and Haley, her best friend. What could have been a private tragedy unfolded into an open wound when Dani discovered that Bill had been sleeping with Haley for months. Not as a mistake but as a deliberate pursuit that culminated in their decision to marry. That revelation was not only an emotional blow but an annihilation of Dani's sense of identity, loyalty, and safety. Her descent into alcohol was both self-destruction and survival. She drank until the hours blurred, until her grief could be contained in the numbness of each glass. But alcohol is no refuge for long. In the throes of her dependence, Dani carried a gun into the wedding that formalized the betrayal. The image remains vivid. Dani, trembling, her hands slick with sweat, nearly pulling the trigger on Haley in a moment where her pain surged into something dangerous. That incident left scars not just on Dani's reputation but on her psyche, marking her as someone volatile, unstable, and dangerously close to the edge of no return. When the fury over Bill's betrayal began to cool, Dani found fragments of herself again. She pieced together a new rhythm, fragile but hopeful. She promised herself she would not fall into that abyss again, and for a time, she kept that promise. But Haley was not content to let Dani heal. Haley carried herself like a victor, brandishing her triumph in subtle ways, poking at Dani's insecurities, ensuring that Dani never fully escaped the shadow of humiliation. The announcement of a supposed pregnancy was the cruelest cut. Haley knew the power of that word child in Dani's life, especially when Dani's bond with her daughter Chelsea was the only pure, untainted love she had left. The cruelty of Haley's lie was not in the fabrication alone but in its intent. She paraded her pregnancy as both shield and weapon, mocking Dani's losses while baiting her temper. In truth, Haley was not pregnant at all. She had woven this deception as a cover, using it to distract Bill while she secretly maintained contact with Randy. Rumors swirled like smoke that Haley and Randy had already had a child together, hidden away from Bill's knowledge. This double betrayal was more grotesque than Dani could have imagined. Haley not only stole her husband but manipulated him with false promises of a family while possibly raising another man's child in the shadows. Dani, already fragile, fell directly into the trap. Haley needled her at every opportunity, poking her with subtle comments, smug expressions, and insinuations sharp enough to cut skin. One confrontation spiraled into chaos, and Dani's anger burst into violence. In the aftermath, Haley turned the narrative against Dani. She whispered to Bill, spinning the story that Dani's rage had caused a miscarriage. Bill, blinded by love or guilt or simply his own weakness, believed her. The story solidified. Dani was not just bitter and broken, she was dangerous, a woman capable of driving another into such stress that a child was lost. In reality, no child existed, but Dani was painted as the villain once again. The weight of such falsehood pressed down on Dani with unbearable force. To lose her husband was one wound, to lose her reputation, her credibility, and her last fragments of dignity was another. She staggered under the weight of whispers, of pitying glances, of friends who distanced themselves. And in the darkest tyranny, she turned again to the substances that promised escape. Alcohol was joined by harsher indulgences, stimulants, pills, anything that could silence the chaos in her head and heart. What she gained in numbness she lost in clarity, her health unraveling as her body bore the cost of each reckless choice. And then came Allison, a shadow from another corner of this twisted saga, to drive the knife even deeper. Allison's decision to kidnap Chelsea was more than a crime, it was a theft of Dani's last anchor. Chelsea had been the one bond that grounded Dani to reality, the one relationship untouched by betrayal or deceit. To have her child taken was to have the ground collapse beneath her feet entirely. Dani's screams, her pleas, her frantic nights searching for answers, painted her as a mother undone, a woman already drowning who had been shoved underwater once again. Her body could not keep up with the war her mind waged. Malnourished, exhausted, poisoned by substances she clung to like life rafts, Dani staggered through her days like a ghost. Each new blow from Haley or Allison chipped away at the fragile scaffolding she had rebuilt. When Haley, careless in her cruelty, brushed against Dani's pain once more, it was the spark to a powder keg. The confrontation exploded. The knife was not premeditated. It was instinct, desperation, the embodiment of every cut Haley had delivered to Dani's soul. In her hands, the blade gleamed under harsh light, its edge trembling as much as Dani's resolve. She did not merely threaten Haley's life, she declared the depth of her own despair, screaming in fury that Haley had taken everything from her husband, her best friend, her dignity, and now, indirectly, her daughter. In that moment, Dani was not just a wronged woman, she was a volcano of grief and betrayal, erupting in a scene too raw to be mistaken for anything but truth. The intensity of Dani's rage was not theatrical. It was animalistic, a survival reflex for someone who had been cornered too long. To outsiders, she may have seemed unhinged, a dangerous woman with a knife and no restraint. But to anyone who truly knew the road that led her here, she was a broken mother, a betrayed friend, and a discarded wife, lashing out at the final thief of her life's meaning. The room where Dani brandished the knife became a crucible where years of deceit boiled over. Haley's smirk cracked into fear for the first time, the realization dawning that the games she had played had consequences beyond gossip and manipulation. Bill's name hung unspoken in the air, his choices echoing in every inch of tension. Randy's shadow lingered, a reminder of secrets yet to be fully unearthed. And Allison, though not present, haunted the scene as the puppet master of Chelsea's abduction, the one crime that had driven Dani past the point of no return. The knife did not yet fall, but the weight of everything Dani had endured sharpened its edge. In that breathless moment, time stretched, and the past replayed in flashes: Bill's confession, Haley's false pregnancy, Chelsea's disappearance, the cold burn of liquor, the scattered pills on a nightstand, the isolation that gnawed at her until she no longer recognized her own reflection. Each memory pressed her hand tighter around the knife's handle, each betrayal whispered that this was the only way to reclaim some measure of control. Dani stood trembling, her eyes wild, her voice cracked but resolute. The fury in her words was not empty threat, it was testament to the years she had been silenced, dismissed, and betrayed. She was not asking Haley to understand anymore. She was demanding recognition of the devastation wrought upon her life, demanding that the pain she carried be seen not as madness but as the natural consequence of relentless cruelty. The night air outside was indifferent. Inside, the walls seemed to close in around the two women, forcing them to confront the truth of what had brought them there. Dani's hand, shaking, held both her salvation and her destruction. Haley, for the first time stripped of her smug armor, saw that Dani's pain was not just weakness but a force strong enough to end lives. The story hung suspended there, between one heartbeat and the next, between the edge of the knife and the edge of consequence, waiting for what would come after the silence. The knife hovered in Dani's trembling grip, a flash of steel that symbolized years of betrayal compressed into one unbearable moment. Haley's wide eyes betrayed the cracks in her carefully crafted mask of control, and for the first time she tasted the fear she had so often inflicted on others. Dani's chest heaved, her breaths ragged, as she felt the years of pain coursing through her veins like fire. She wanted Haley to see the ruins she had left behind, to feel the abyss Dani had been pushed into by lies, deception, and the theft of everything she once held sacred. But the blade did not strike. It dangled on the precipice of violence, suspended by a fragile thread of Dani's last shred of restraint. What stopped her was not forgiveness, but exhaustion. The years of rage and despair had hollowed her out, leaving her empty and shaking. Dropping the knife would not heal her, yet using it would not return Chelsea, nor erase the lies that had painted her as a monster. Dani staggered back, the weight of her choice collapsing onto her shoulders, heavier than the weapon she held. Haley, regaining her composure, seized the opening. With venom in her voice, she spat accusations that Dani was unstable, dangerous, unfit even to call herself a mother. The words, sharp as any blade, drove into Dani's core. But beneath Haley's renewed arrogance was a flicker of unease. She had seen the edge Dani was capable of reaching, and it rattled her. She could mock Dani's weakness in words, but the memory of that trembling knife would never leave her. Bill became the unspoken axis around which their hatred spun. He was the man who had once promised Dani forever and now stood united with Haley in a bond built on betrayal. Yet whispers began to seep into the cracks of his certainty. The rumors about Randy gnawed at him like termites at the foundation of a house. Was the child Haley claimed his? Or was he raising the shadow of another man's lineage? Every time he looked into Haley's eyes, the seed of doubt grew larger. Randy remained a ghostly figure in the background, his presence haunting every interaction. He was not just a rumor but a living reminder of Haley's duplicity. Bill's suspicions pulled him closer to the truth, even as Haley doubled down on her lies. She played her role with conviction, weaponizing tears and vulnerability to keep Bill tethered. But she could not erase the lingering scent of Randy in her orbit. Bill's love for Haley became poisoned by paranoia, transforming their supposed fairy tale union into a fragile house of cards. Meanwhile, Dani's descent into substance abuse worsened in the aftermath of Chelsea's abduction. The memory of her daughter being torn away was a wound that refused to close, and Dani numbed it with alcohol and pills. Each morning she woke weaker, her body buckling under the strain of neglect and toxins. Yet beneath her frailty simmered a quiet determination. Chelsea was still out there, and Dani's maternal instinct clung to that fact with a ferocity stronger than any addiction. She knew Allison had her daughter, and though Allison's motives were a labyrinth of cruelty and instability, Dani vowed she would not let Chelsea vanish into that darkness forever. Allison's presence loomed larger now, her actions spiraling further into obsession. Kidnapping Chelsea was not just an act of malice but a twisted attempt to shatter Dani completely. Allison fed off Dani's suffering, each tear and each broken scream a victory in her warped mind. Yet even Allison's control had limits. Chelsea, young as she was, carried the resilience of her mother. Though frightened, she had her own quiet fire, refusing to break under Allison's manipulation. This silent defiance became Allison's greatest frustration, unraveling her plans in ways she had not anticipated. Haley, desperate to keep her secrets buried, began weaving tighter webs of deception. She continued to paint Dani as unstable, a danger to everyone around her, knowing that public perception was her strongest weapon. If she could convince Bill that Dani was beyond redemption, then her own sins would remain hidden. But Dani's breakdowns, fueled by substances, created a paradox. Each outburst validated Haley's accusations, yet each act of raw vulnerability reminded Bill of the woman he had once loved. The contrast gnawed at him, creating fissures in his loyalty to Haley. The stage was set for a reckoning. Dani's survival now hinged on whether she could claw her way out of her addiction long enough to confront the enemies who had taken everything from her. She stood at a crossroads, allow herself to sink further into the oblivion of alcohol and drugs, or harness her rage as a weapon to reclaim Chelsea and expose Haley for the liar she was. Bill's future also dangled in uncertainty. Would he continue to live in Haley's carefully constructed illusion, or would the whispers of Randy's involvement finally shatter his blind devotion? His heart was torn between the family he thought he was building and the unsettling possibility that it was all a lie. Haley herself faced an inevitable collapse. Lies, like glass, fracture under pressure, and every new deception she spun to protect her image only tightened the noose around her neck. The secret about Randy, once exposed, would not just ruin her marriage but destroy the fragile empire she had built on manipulation. And Allison, the wild card in this storm, grew increasingly erratic. Chelsea's presence was both her prize and her undoing. The longer she held onto Dani's daughter, the more unstable she became, and the more dangerous the situation grew for everyone. The inevitable clash among Dani, Haley, Bill, Randy, and Allison loomed closer with each passing day, a collision born of betrayal, lies, addiction, and desperation. And in the center of it all was Chelsea, the innocent thread that bound their twisted lives together, a reminder of what was at stake when deception and cruelty push people to their breaking point. The night that would bring their paths back together was approaching, not with quiet whispers but with the promise of explosions, emotional, physical, and irreversible. None of them would emerge unscathed, and the truth waiting to be revealed threatened to consume them all. The silence that once filled the room now fractured as consequences converged from every direction, each character driven toward an ending they could neither avoid nor control. Dani, drained from her spirals of addiction and fury, carried within her a single ember of resolve. Chelsea, her daughter, was no longer just a victim but the only tether keeping Dani from collapsing entirely into oblivion. Every pill swallowed and every bottle emptied had dulled her edges, but beneath it all, the image of Chelsea's frightened face pierced through the fog. That love, fierce and desperate, became the only weapon Dani still had left to wield. Allison's grip on Chelsea faltered as her own unraveling accelerated. The longer she held the child, the more Chelsea's quiet defiance chipped away at her dominance. Chelsea's refusal to cry, her silent strength, disarmed Allison in ways violence never could. In moments of weakness, Allison saw in Chelsea a reflection of herself, a younger, purer version she wished she could have been. That recognition bred confusion, a crack in her cruel certainty. It left her vulnerable, and Dani sensed it like blood in the water. Haley, however, grew more desperate. Her empire of lies teetered on collapse, and every encounter with Dani pushed her closer to exposure. Bill had begun to question the stories she spun. The whispers about Randy no longer seemed like idle gossip but fragments of a truth he could no longer deny. Each time Haley looked at him, she saw the doubt etched deeper into his face, and with it, the slow erosion of her control. She doubled down, clinging to manipulation, but the harder she pressed, the faster the illusion slipped through her fingers. The confrontation that finally drew them all together was not planned but inevitable, a storm that had been brewing since betrayal first ignited Dani's collapse. It began with a tip, a fragment of information about Allison's hideout, delivered not by a friend but by someone too tired of her chaos to stay silent. Dani seized on it, adrenaline and fear clearing her poisoned body in a surge of focus she had not felt in months. With trembling hands and hollowed eyes, she set out to reclaim her daughter. Bill followed, torn between duty and guilt, unsure if he came to protect Haley's image, to salvage Dani's broken soul, or to find the truth that had eluded him for too long. Haley, unwilling to relinquish her hold over him, trailed close, determined to twist even this crisis into proof of Dani's instability. And Randy, pulled from the shadows by the weight of his secrets, stepped reluctantly into the fray, his presence a living confession Haley could no longer bury. The hideout was no fortress, just a forgotten house at the edge of town where time had chewed the wood and silence held court. Inside, Allison clutched Chelsea with wild eyes, her voice cracking between threats and pleas. Dani's arrival was not graceful. She stumbled, her body weakened, but her voice rang with the force of every wound she carried. She demanded her daughter back, not as a request but as a primal cry that left no room for denial. What followed was chaos. Haley, ever the manipulator, tried to twist the scene to her favor, painting Dani as the aggressor even as the truth unraveled around her. Bill's anger finally surfaced, not at Dani but at Haley, whose lies about the pregnancy shattered under Randy's reluctant admission. The child she claimed was Bill's never existed, and the one she may have had belonged to Randy. Years of deceit collapsed in an instant, and Bill saw not a partner but a stranger who had stolen his life piece by piece. Allison, cornered by the storm of revelations, broke. Her threats dissolved into sobs, her grip on Chelsea loosening as she realized the child was not hers to keep, nor her enemy to destroy. Dani rushed forward, pulling Chelsea into her arms, collapsing to the floor as relief and anguish collided in uncontrollable sobs. For the first time in months, she held the one thing Haley, Bill, and Allison could never take from her: her role as a mother, undeniable and sacred. The aftermath was not neat. It rarely is when lives have been shredded by betrayal and addiction. Allison was taken away, her mind too fractured to fight the fate awaiting her. Haley's empire of lies lay in ruins, her relationship with Bill irreparably destroyed. Randy vanished again into the shadows, leaving behind only the bitter truth of his entanglement. Bill stood alone, stripped of illusions, forced to reckon with the devastation his choices had helped fuel. And Dani, broken but not defeated, walked out of the house with Chelsea's hand in hers. The road ahead was uncertain, her health still fragile, Her reputation scarred, but for the first time, she did not walk alone. Chelsea was with her, and in that simple truth was the promise of something stronger than vengeance, redemption. The final image was not one of triumph but of survival. Dani stood at the threshold of a new beginning, her body weakened, her soul weathered, but her heart still beating for the one person who had given her reason to rise again. The betrayals would linger, the scars would remain, but the cycle of destruction had broken. In reclaiming Chelsea, Dani had reclaimed herself. The ending was not a clean victory. It was messy, jagged, and raw, but it was real. And in a world of lies, manipulations, and betrayals, truth, however painful, was the only thing that could set her free.